Okay, now grade 5 gets us in the road to the War for Independence and then the war itself. So why did the colonists start to rebel against Great Britain? Who were the patriots and kind of who weren't? What were their grievances? And then finally, emphasis on the Declaration of Independence. One thing I want to stress is that hammering home that the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution are two separate documents separated by 10 years. And I think that's really important to stress. So it gets into why rebel? And the main kind of originating issue is the French and Indian War, which leads the British to kind of pay more attention to the American colonies. Students then kind of have to become familiar with a series of acts and laws from the British and then responses to those taxes and laws. We get to who were the patriots, who weren't. The grade 5 gives kind of examples of loyalists, gives examples of moderates in Britain, and things that people can read, whether it's speeches from William Pitt, Edmund Burke, writings of John Dickinson, or Thomas Paine's Common Sense. Finally, it focuses in on the Declaration of Independence. And the Declaration of Independence is really great for kind of two reasons. One is you can get into the selected phrases, those things people talk about and use today, created equal, inalienable rights. Like these are phrases people still use today. It also, the Declaration of Independence has a list of grievances. Like here's what the patriots are upset about. And so it's a good way to kind of like get people to understand like, okay, look, they listed what they're upset about. And this is, students could get into that. It then has, grade 5 has a classroom example. And I want you to look at this closely because in your projects, you're going to be creating classroom activities and for students, you know, things that you might teach. So here's an example of one that you can go through. And then the section on the American Revolution is how did it start? How was it fought differently? Battles. And then how did diverse people experience the war? And when I think about grade 5 at this point, I'm really struck at how much warfare there is, how much fighting. And while kind of we want to tiptoe around issues of slavery, the issue of war is just kind of like, oh yeah, people fight wars. And I wonder how, I know it's in movies and cartoons and things like that, but I wonder if being desensitized to war as a thing of society is something that happens so early for children and that they're not actually like this is, I mean, war is terrifying. War is horrible and might be necessary, might be a good war, but there's so much war here that I think it's hard for that people, we don't wrap our minds or hearts around it very well. So we get into the American Revolution, key figures like George Washington, fighting the different battles, different places. You can get specifics over who fought where, how. And then finally, how were natives, free blacks, slaves, and women important in the conduct of the war. It looks at Lord Dunmore's proclamation in Virginia about freeing slaves who would fight for the British. And then other examples of kind of what happens when you fight a war for independence, but people hold others as slavery. The role of women in the war, the Daughters of Liberty, Abigail Adams, this concept of Republican motherhood, which is that when you create a new nation, a new government that has citizens, mothers become super important in educating their sons to be good people, to be good citizens. Civic duty becomes really important. Gives examples of contributions of everyday people here that you could look into their writings, their thoughts about the war, and then a whole bunch of other list of documents you could use in the classroom to get why is there an American Revolution? How do people experience it? The next section is going to get into the development of the Constitution. And so much of this work has focused on getting to an independent United States and who is an American. Now, the Constitution is really going to set up what is this government like, that the Constitution is the governing document for the United States government. And I think that stressing that, I find that students even in college don't seem to understand that the Constitution is a governing document. It is a legal document that binds together a civil society. And that sets the parameters for how people live within this this institution called the United States of America. So that's what we're going to get into next and kind of conclude these videos on grade 5.